Having gone through the VC system and interacted with people at my school and from other schools, I've realized that despite the vast diversity of VC subjects available, there are really only four main types of VC students. Hi everyone, my name is Darren. For those of you who are new to the channel, I'm a not so recent anymore, Year 12 graduate from Scotch College based in Melbourne, Australia. And starting in less than a week, I will be beginning medicine at Monash University. So for today's video, I wanted to talk about something that I've observed, and that is the four main types of VCE students. So we have the grinder, the one-trick pony, the mathlete, and the hacker. At this point, I want to introduce you guys to something called the aggregate, and it's not as popular as the ATAR, but you may have heard of it, and it's actually how they determine your ATAR. So they rank everyone's aggregate, and then if you're in the top like 35 or in the middle, so they'll rank you, and whatever placing you are, that sort of allocates you to an ATAR. And I'll leave the link in the description below with the 2020 table, which details what aggregate matches what ATAR, so you can kind of see what you need to aim for. With each of the four types, I will be talking about what the aggregate is capped at, so you can sort of see what the maximum score you could get is. And I'll also give some advice as to how to do well for each of the four types. Enjoy. So first up, we have the grinder. Now this is someone whose subjects don't really scale or might even scale down. For example, subjects like further maths, business management, legal studies. And I also include in this group kids who have subjects that scale up a little bit. For example, chemistry or math methods, but nothing too extreme like the languages or spec maths. So your aggregate, if you're a grinder, is capped at around 210, assuming none of your subjects scale up that much. And that's because if you get 50 for each subject and you add them up, then you get 210. And just for context, that is slightly above the requirement for 99.95. So if you really maximize your scores, you could achieve the highest possible ATAR, even as a grinder. So advice with grinders, I would advise working really hard at the Englishes, just generally, because English has to be in your top four, and if you're doing more than one English, then you want both of them to be good, because you don't really know which one will be better until the results come out. So it's really important to do that. Apart from that, I recommend really knowing your top four and really knowing your strengths, especially towards the end of the year. At the start of the year, I recommend working hard at all your subjects because you have time, there's not that many SACs, and you don't really know what subjects you'll be especially good at until you do a couple SACs. After that though, I think really know your top four, because it's important to work hard at those and try to get those extra few raw scores, as these raw scores actually correspond to your scaled scores most of the time. So for example, with English, if you get a 45 raw, 45 scaled, 50 raw, 50 scaled. Whereas with a subject like Latin, 45 raw and 50 raw, there's only 0.7 scale difference. So once they've been scaled, there's only 0.7 difference. So for example, for English, you get 5 added to your aggregate if you get a 50 instead of a 45. Whereas for Latin, you only get 0.7 added to your aggregate. And 5 is huge when it comes to determining your ATAR. So it's really important, if you don't have subjects that scale a lot, to try and get that raw score up as much as you can, because it basically corresponds to a scaled score. And in some cases, with subjects that scale down, you want to avoid losing any study scores as much as you can. So you can get the highest aggregate that you can, and so you can get the ATAR that you want for the course you want to get, or just for a score you want to get. So next up, we have the one-trick pony. Now this is someone who is a grinder, but they have one language. Now this could be a modern language like Chinese, French, German, or it could be an ancient language like Latin. For modern languages, the ATAR is capped at around 213, and for a subject like Latin, if that's the only language you're doing, your aggregate is capped at around 215. So for these people, advice-wise, definitely work hard at your English, once again, because a raw score corresponds to a scaled score, which corresponds to 1 added or taken away from your aggregate. And if you look at the ATAR versus aggregate table below, then you'll see that 1 is a huge amount. Like, it can drastically change your ATAR, and it's really beneficial if you get that extra point. Otherwise, for the language, I think of languages as sort of like a booster. Usually for people, if they have one scaling subject, once all the subjects have been scaled, the scaling subject is usually their best one, even if raw score wise it's not their best, because of the scaling that it offers. So I think it's important that you know your goals, know your ATAR, know what aggregate you want to aim for, and know roundabout what score you want for your language. And however, I think it's also important to be smart about this. For languages, because of the scaling, one raw score is no longer one scaled score. Like for the example with Chinese, between 45 and 50, the scale difference is 2 points. Whereas if you look at the raw score is 5 points. So once you know your goals, there's no point, or as long as you're above a certain threshold, you don't really need to push extremely hard for a one more raw score. It might be more worth it spending time on English or spending time on your other subjects that don't scale too much, because of that scaling and how it squishes the difference. So whereas before it was 5, now the difference is only 2. So just be aware of that. Try and get yourself above the limit so that you get the proper contribution and the best possible, or what you require, the required addition to your aggregate, but also don't get too dug up in it, because gaining one study score in English is much more worth it than gaining one in a language. Next up is the Mathlete. Now, this is a pretty classic type of student who excels in their maths. And so if you're a mathlete, your top 4 is usually going to be one of the Englishes, usually Eng Lang, I found with mathlete type students, but English, EAL, Lit happens as well. And then there's physics, spec, and methods. I found that because physics a lot of it is maths orientated, that's also in the top 4. And for you, your aggregate is capped at around 215 to 216, depending on how much method scales. Some years it scales to 51, some years it scales to only slightly above 50. But spec maths is almost always scales to 55 maximum, and so that gives it that 215, 216 cap. My advice for mathletes mainly is to work on your English and to work on physics, because those two are the subjects that don't scale at all. So one raw score equals one scaled score. Whereas for your maths, like method spec, I think that as long as you're above a certain threshold, then you're pretty well off. And I think English particularly is really important to work on, because I found that with my friends who were mathletes, it was English that they struggled with, and with past students, it was sometimes English that let them down. Because if you're good at maths, the other 3 physics, spec, methods usually come through quite well, but it's really that English that you have to work on and make sure you do it right so that you end up getting the score that you should and you're capable of getting. So finally, we have the hacker. Now, this is someone who does a lot of subjects that scale a lot, and I would classify this as 2 or more languages, or spec maths, a language, and perhaps other languages. Now, the aggregate that's capped for this depends on how many languages you do. So I actually fell under the hacker category, and so because I did Latin, I did Chinese, and I did spec maths, and my aggregate, the maximum possible I could get was 223. For someone who doesn't do Latin and just does a language and spec maths, then their maximum would be 218, which they're both like well above the threshold for 99.95. So what I would advise, once again, really work hard at your English, because it's going to be the only subject, or one of the only subjects in the top 4 that doesn't scale, and so each score directly contributes to one aggregate point, which heavily impacts your ATAR. However, I think at this point, when you have so many scaling subjects, it's important to realize that there are still differences. So whereas before I was saying for the one-trick pony and for the grinders, for the one-trick pony, that sort of scaling between 45 and 50 for a language subject, once it's scaled, the difference becomes squashed. I think it's still important to recognize that there still exists a difference. So for example, I was aiming higher for my specialist maths and I didn't get the score that I wanted, so I got 44 in the end. And compare that to a 50, the scale difference was 2, which is still quite significant when you look at it. So I think at the point when you have so many scaling subjects, it's important that you're firstly above the threshold and above what you want to get the ATAR or get the aggregate or get the whatever goal you want. But from there, I think I also recommend you work really hard for each raw score, because it can really make an impact, and it's really important that you just try to do the best you can, because your top 4 is all going to be really high scaling subjects anyway, and your bottom 2 is not going to contribute that much. So I recommend first getting above a certain threshold and then working really hard to try and push that even higher. I just want to say that I don't want you guys to get bogged down in the numbers at all, because it is completely not helpful. I just wanted to give you guys this video at the start of the year so you have some sort of idea of what to work on and a little bit of indication as to the numbers. I hopped on an ADA calculator once at the start of the year and I never touched it again. And it's no use getting too concerned about what a 45 scales do, what a 46 scales do, and getting too bogged down in all that. What I mainly made this video for is so you guys get a general gist of what you need to aim for. So with the different subject sets that you might be doing, perhaps you can now identify what threshold for a language that you want to get above, or you can identify, or you see that you want to put some more effort into your Englishes and your non-scaling subjects. I think the numbers, just have an awareness of them at the start of the year and then put them out of your mind because they're not helpful and they're really draining, and they'll come at the end of the year anyway. So don't think too much about the numbers. Have some goals as to what subjects you want to work on and put more effort in, and yeah, everything else will come naturally. Thanks so much for tuning into today's video. If you're looking for more VCE related content, please check out these ones here. If you've enjoyed today's video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Good luck with all your SACs and assessments, and I look forward to seeing you all next time.